Thank you for watching today, and we are going to be talking about the presidential pardon power, and more specifically, how President Biden's recent controversies around the presidential pardon power usages that he's had. He has pardoned more people than any president has done since the Civil War. So this is kind of a big deal, and it's making the news for all the wrong reasons. And when I'm talking about that, I'm really not talking about his son, Hunter Biden here, who clearly had all kinds of drama and baggage and problems that he brought to the table. And I really think Biden probably, despite denying that he would do that for 6 months or so, his pardon of Hunter Biden here was mostly to protect President Biden himself and his corruption and involvement with all kinds of other scandals. But that's not really why I wanted to do today's video. The reason why I'm doing today's video is because I try to deal with public integrity cases and corruption in government all the time. And this recent story here about Biden basically he had pardoned or had clemency, which is where they reduce or eliminate the sentence for 1,500 people in one day, 1,500 criminals in one day. But this included a couple of just standout decisions that just would defy common sense if you were going to be looking at them. And one is the Kids for Cash judge referenced in the title of this article right here, and the $54 million embezzler. So this is going to be quite a story, and I want to really get into it and talk about it. But before I do, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button down below. Please feel free to share this video with other people who may be interested in trying to fix or address the problems in government, just like you are. Also, if you do remember, try to make sure you hit those subscribe button if you haven't already done so. And also, feel free to take this video and share it with others. There's all kinds of ways to get the word out there in our community. My channel has been growing a little bit more lately, and I think partially it's because people like you just sharing it with other people, and it helps us get the word out there. So let's go back to Biden's desire to set all the criminals free, which seems to be a basic signature characteristic of his entire presidency. And it's really raised its ugly head with these recent series of pardons. But the pardon power for the U.S. president has gone back to the foundations of this country. In fact, George Washington himself pardoned a number of people when, at the end of his presidency, specifically the people who led the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794. Why that's actually significant is that it was actually George Washington himself who led the militia to go and suppress the Whiskey Rebellion. And essentially, they had arrested several of the leaders there who were in trouble for basically leading a rebellion of farmers, rural farmers mainly, against this newfound republic, mainly for their taxation without representation. And their argument was that the federal government was basically abusing them, and they were caught in full rebellion against the government. And George Washington decided to pardon them. And a lot of this was about trying to move on from various drama in the country at the time, and trauma, and basically pardoning them and letting them go back and being able to move forward with the country. And that was basically the same attitude that you had when President Andrew Johnson became president after Lincoln was assassinated. And he also was known for pardoning Southern soldiers or people who were involved in the Confederacy during the Civil War. And this was kind of a big deal at the time. Now, this is the era in which the largest number of pardons were ever issued in American history. And it's probably no surprise. You had this horrific war. Over 600,000 Americans died on both sides of the fight. Just in the span of, a 5-year window. It was horrific. You had this terrible Reconstruction process, which it had a lot of its own problems. And basically the country's trying to move on from the greatest trauma it had ever had. And so President Johnson, this is actually some early stories and photos, or not, there's some photos of some Confederate soldiers here, but basically this is a drawing that was made of one of these. Apparently the people would come together and he would sign pardons and he would meet the people that he's actually pardoning at the White House. Now, the pardoning of Southern sympathizers or Southern soldiers, this really occurred during 3 different presidencies. You had Abraham Lincoln, who actually pardoned quite a few of the soldiers at that time, some of the Confederate soldiers at that time. You also had Johnson, as I mentioned already, but then you also had Ulysses S. Grant, who had been a Union general and a big part of the success of the Northern armies fighting against the South. And when he was president, he basically pardoned quite a few more Confederates at that point in time. So it was a big wave of pardons after the Civil War was over. More recently in our time, in the 70s, you had President Ford here who pardoned Nixon, who was currently being investigated after the Watergate shenanigans and all kinds of other drama that was also kind of tearing the country apart at the time. And Ford was later on saying that he felt like that pardon was necessary to move on from the drama and the trauma of the country and to basically kind of stop it from occurring moving forward. And it was basically that pardon was attributed in a large extent to why Ford became himself quite unpopular and was beat by Jimmy Carter just a few years later. Now, even Donald Trump now coming into office has made it very public that after he takes office, one of the first things he's going to do is pardon a lot of the J6 protesters that were substantially overcharged by the Department of Justice after that protest in 2021. It was really, this became a very politically charged event. A lot of people were treated substantially unfairly by the legal system at that time, and especially when you compare to how softball and basically no consequences that occurred for the BLM riots just a few months earlier when thousands of rioters all over the country decided to go around and burn down most of the big cities in America. And yet this one place here, you had 1,500 people that were charged and many more, and the Department of Justice significantly seemed to treat them quite a bit differently than they did to any other protesters. Now, all of these types of pardons, presidential pardons, are really were predicated on this idea, whether it was George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or Johnson or Ford or coming up with Trump. These pardons are really more specifically focused on trying to help the country move on from a difficult time, either a conflict or political strife and drama or something else. And they're viewed, the way the presidents have handed out those pardons, it's generally been viewed as a way to kind of heal the country by eliminating martyrhood or abuse or stepping back and just trying to help the country move ahead in kind of a more effective or hopefully forgiving fashion. That's generally the approach and the reason for those types of pardons. But it hasn't always been that way. Like many other presidents, when the Clintons came to town at the end, especially at the end of the Clinton administration, there was a substantial level of controversy around quite a few of Clinton's pardons that he issued then. One of them, for example, was pardoning a bunch of terrorists who had basically killed people in America and had led a bombing campaign and had assassinated people. The belief and the drama around this at the time was it was an effort of President Clinton to make it easier for Hillary Clinton, who was going to run for governor in New York, to basically gain favor with some of these leftists who thought that those terrorists who had been in prison for so long for their crimes that they should be forgiven. Now, it wasn't just that. It was also Clinton pardoning international fugitive and Mark Rich right here, who came from a very wealthy family and whose wife was donating hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Democrat Party and conveniently also to the Clinton Library. And at the last minute, Clinton pardoned him. There were also contributions, of course, that came into the Clinton Legal Defense Fund. I mean, all kinds of ugliness associated with several of the pardons in the Clinton administration. Now those days have passed us by, and despite the controversies that Clinton had around a lot of his pardons, generally you could at least explain or understand which pardons were given out. I mean, for instance, he even pardoned his brother who of an old drug conviction, for example, and then it kind of made the news that about a month later his brother got arrested again. Obviously kind of a ne'er-do-well situation for his brother, and although not quite as extreme as the Hunter Biden pardon that was recently given. So really, with Joe Biden, one of the questions is that nobody actually thinks this guy knows what's happening or that he's even in a supervisory role. Clearly, he's outsourced the decisions on these pardons, and this widespread 8,000 some odd pardons that are just being handed out like confetti from the White House have clearly really created a lot of problems and trauma. He may not even be fully aware of these things that have happened, which is one of the problems with having basically a president who's suffering from dementia like this in office. And let's talk about a couple of these pardons because they were ridiculous. Mark Ciavella here, this guy was a former judge out in Pennsylvania and was involved in just a horrific crime. It was nicknamed the Kids for Cash judge, and it was a horrific scandal that occurred. And he was convicted by a jury back in 2011, and he was sentenced while he was on the bench as a judge in Pennsylvania. He actually sentenced 1,500 juveniles to private detention center in exchange for bribes from the owners of that detention center. And over $2.1 million exchanged hands. It was horrific because in at least one case, one of these, it was overcharging, and at least one case, one of the juveniles committed suicide after the fact, and after the experience felt destroyed his life. This judge was just dumping these kids into this horrible system when some large percentage of them probably didn't need to go there. There was an attempted sweetheart plea deal that also happened there, kind of echoes of the Hunter Biden saga, and it also included a number of other players. That's why you had a number of charges that this judge was found guilty of by this jury, and he was serving prison. I mean, this was a bad guy who did bad things and caused great damage and thoroughly violated the trust that anybody would have with judges. And it's probably one of the worst cases recently of a judge in this kind of a situation. Direct bribes. The judges are usually smart enough not to get caught when they take this. So this guy, it was just a really bad case. The other one that they were talking about here is this Rita Crudwell from Dixon, Illinois, home of Abraham Lincoln, by the way. But anyway, she was a comptroller in the city, and from 1990 to 2011, she managed to steal between $53 and $54 million. Some articles rounded up to 54. I've rounded it down to 53 million. But who's counting once you reach those kind of numbers? She was stealing millions of dollars a year from the city, which was not a big city, and getting away with it. And it allowed her actually to live this elaborate lifestyle where she was getting these award-winning show horses. She bought, different properties, homes in other states, living just an extravagant lifestyle, having lots of cars. There was some money that they were able to claw back after she was found guilty and convicted. But at this point in time, I mean, she has the distinction of being the national record holder here of municipal public theft, $53 million. That is a substantial amount of money, even in Illinois. And both of these guys, the Cash for Kids judge and this gal, they were both serving a sentence at home. And Biden here decides that these are the people who deserve clemency. Set them free, right? These people should be out there doing whatever they need to do. And so there's substantial controversy because both these people left a substantial legacy of harm behind them. In the case of the fraudster from Dixon, Illinois, she had stole so much money from that city, and they had kept increasing taxes all the time to make up for shortfalls. And even now, many years later, they're still suffering some of those financial consequences. And these are the people that Biden decided to set free, or in this case, basically give them clemency for the rest of their sentence. Now, part of this is fallout that occurred from just this absurd COVID era where basically one of the policies, and this started under the Trump administration, where they were letting nonviolent criminals, and both of these criminals were considered nonviolent, meaning that they were unlikely to assault or kill or hurt other people. And they were basically allowed to be released from prison, and they had a home confinement sort of situation. And what this you really had this effort, I think, in the COVID era where they were trying to decriminalize things as much as possible, and which is okay in some cases, but you can't be decriminalizing or at least downplaying significant crimes like this. When people commit real crimes, there has to be real consequences. And so it's generated a lot of blowback on these two cases because these are really big cases of public integrity violations, destruction of the public trust by elected or appointed officials that are in significant positions of authority, whether it's a judge or a comptroller or somebody that's elected to office. When they are stealing wholesale funds like this or taking bribes and they're dumb enough to get caught, it really, there needs to be consequences because that's the only thing that prevents other people from coming and doing the same thing. Now, the truth is, we're entering the post-Biden era. He's going to wander off into the jungle or wherever he came from and disappear in the beaches of Maryland, maybe, and we're unlikely to really see him again. Biden's clearly suffering from, a dementia and just a really difficult ending to his presidency, and the country's not going to miss him. In fact, most people in the country, they don't even realize he's still president, technically in that position, which makes it kind of a weird era right now. But I think it's very important for us to draw attention when the presidents do something wrong. I still support the idea of the president having a presidential pardon power for the reasons, I think, that the examples I gave from George Washington all the way up to what I hope Trump does here in another month. There are appropriate uses of the presidential pardon power. We really should discourage presidents from pardoning bad guys like Mark Rich just for campaign contributions or for kickbacks to your own presidential library. We should discourage presidents from pardoning people that are clear menaces to society and total destroyers of the public trust, like the Cash for Kids judge, like that comptroller from Dixon, Illinois. We really cannot allow people like that to just get away with it and be treated with kid gloves. We need to have some level of punishment for them. But I have to point out that in both those cases, their conviction only occurred because people were willing to get involved and engaged and put a lot more attention and spotlight on these elected officials. It's the only way you can make a difference where you live. There is a place for presidential pardon power, even for somebody like Biden. And although I don't think he's making the decisions anymore, it is something that's worth talking about. I'm kind of glad it's in the public arena for us to discuss this now. And it's going to be up to President Trump to decide after the J6 basically pardons that I anticipate him giving right away, but being very prudent with how he uses that pardon power moving forward. So with that, thank you guys so much for watching, and just remember, when you want to make a difference in your community and make an impact, you got to show up because, as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up.